Hello everyone and welcome to the video where we will learn about Python functions. Let's get started. But before we dive into the details, in this lesson we will cover three key important points. The first one is where you will learn how to define functions in Python. The next, you will understand the difference between the value returning and non-value returning functions. And the next, you will learn how to call functions properly in Python. And I hope that by watching these videos, these concepts will help you to write clearer, reusable, and more efficient code. Happy coding! Well, a function is a block of reusable code that performs a specific task. For example, you have already used a function like print and also the input. Here, print will display the message that you want to display in the console, and then input is where you have a situation where you want to get the input from the user. These are built-in Python functions. The function helps us to organize the code and reduce repetition and make program more efficient. We'll see into that later on. Now, let's consider the following example. Here I have import numpy as np, and then I've calculated x1, x2, and x3. So you see here are the expressions. They look similar, but the only difference is the value here. Here, the first one I've used 10, and the next is 15, and then 20. But here we are repeating a complex expression multiple times. Here we have three repetitions. Instead of writing it again and again, I believe we can use Python functions to simplify this particular code. Looking at the previous example, we write the same formula multiple times to make our code complicated and harder to maintain. This is not a good practice. The better way is to define a function that can calculate this for any input value. Here we have an input value of 10, and then we have another input value 15 and 20. This is the one main advantages of functions, which is to reduce repetitive code. Well, functions can be categorized into two different types. We have the value returning function, and then another one is the non-value returning functions. For value returning, these functions will calculate a result and then return it using the return statement, right? For example, we have x equals to cosine of 20.112, y equals to the absolute of 20.323, and so on. If we move on to the non-returning value functions, these functions perform an action but do not return any value. For example, here, print, hello guys. The print function will not return any value. I believe by understanding these types will help you to write better functions in future. Well, when a function returns a value, we can store it in a variable by using the assignment operator. Remember that if this is a value returning function, it means that we can use the equal sign here or the assignment operator. For instance, here we calculate the cosine of 20.112, and then once we have gotten the result, and we assign the value to x. Here we have x, y, z, and so on, store the results of their respective functions, which can be used later in the code. In Python, we define a value returning function by using this particular syntax. We have the define keyword, and then we have the function name, my function. You can always change this name into another name, the parameter 1, and then the type of parameter 1, which is a float number, and then the expected value type, the expected return value type. The function can be anything but should be meaningful. And then we have the parameter as the inputs, as the inputs that the function uses, and then we have the return class. So the class of value the function will return. This structure will make sure that our function is clear, readable, and reusable. Maybe one day another programmer wants to see our code. If we organize our code by using Python functions, I believe it is readable and easy to use. Here we have the function body. Sometimes your expression can be complicated, so it is very useful for you to break into different lines over here. But then you have to declare the return variable. For instance, I am going to return the value of p once I've calculated p. This is the way we write, this is the way how we return the value of p. When naming a function, I need you to remember a few rules. So the first rule is where the name here, my function, must contain only letters, numbers, or underscores. Other than that will not be accepted. It cannot start with a number, even though it is allowable for you to use number in the function name, but it should not begin with a number. That is the most important point that you need to remember. Function names should be meaningful and describes their purpose, right? For example, here my function serves, it is not meaningful, but this is just an example. Maybe you could rename this to another name which is related to the one that you are computing here. Maybe like a Gaussian distribution or maybe something like that. Here we have the parameter. The name of the parameter is param1. The parameter allows functions to receive input values. Here param1 is the parameter that the function uses to perform the calculation. The function can have no parameters, right? You simply remove everything in between the parentheses here. Or a function can have one or more parameters. For instance, here we are only using one parameter, but it is possible to use more. And then in each parameter has a class, right? For example, here the class of param1 is the float type. Sometimes we call this as the type instead of a class. This is replaceable. You can use the integer for whole numbers, float, boolean, string, or str, and more. But here, just for an example, we use the float. Here the function returns a float value, right? Return class ensure we get the expected output when calling a function, which we will learn later at the end of this lesson. Now, the function body contains the actual code that runs when the function is called. For instance, this is the body of the function, the one that is within the red box. Indentation is required in Python, so always indent the function body correctly. It will help to differentiate the function body. Here we have one tab character. It depends on your IDE. So it is important for you to put the indentation here. Now let's look at a function that does not return any value. Some functions do not return a value but perform an action instead. Here the function calculates p, but it does not return anything. Here this is like a non-value returning function. The only difference is that we remove this p. But still it is computing p, but maybe it prints the value of p in the console, but it does not need to return any value at all. It depends on the situation that the programmer faced. Now, to use a function, we need to call the function. You need to remember the keyword call. It is a programming term. There are two ways of calling a function. Basically, we categorize functions into two. We have the built-in library functions, which is mainly the functions are written by the Python developers. And then next we have the user-defined function. It is a function, a group of functions written by you yourself, placed in the same Python source file. First, maybe you define your own function here, and then you call the function. The name of the function is foo, and then you call the function foo, and then you put the parameter value. Calling your own code does not need any dot operator, but for some reasons, maybe you define your code in another file name. In that sense, there is a possibility that you need to use the dot operator, but we will reserve that into advanced Python programming lessons. We have reached to the end point of this video. Let us summarize what we have learned today. Number one, function improve code reusability. So you write once and then you use multiple times. And then function can take inputs and return values, which makes them flexible. And then we have the built-in and the user-defined functions. For example, Python has built-in function print and input, but we can also create our own functions. And lastly, we have the value returning and non-value returning functions. And then, as we know, some functions return values while others simply perform the actions. I believe that understanding these concepts will help you to write efficient Python program. I'll see you in the next video, and happy coding. Bye-bye.